Drug overdose deaths soared to over 93,000 in 2020. That's a 30% increase over the previous year. That's tragic and alarming. But beyond the statistics are the stories of real people, people we love, our families, our friends, our neighbors, who share their stories of pain, grief, and loss and suffering through addiction, as well as the stories of those who work tirelessly to combat this devastating epidemic. I'm Mike Torville. Join me now for Healing Voices Project. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Healing Voices Project podcast, where we'll share stories of addiction, grief, recovery, and courage. I'm Mike Torville, your host. Thank you all for joining us today. Each week, we'll be bringing you different guests that include people going through addiction, people in recovery, who talk about their struggles, their challenges, and most of all, their successes. And we'll have people in the field of addiction, professionals who work with addiction every day, who talk about their experiences, their insights, and they'll be offering some helpful advice as well. Today we have a guest, my friend Kirk Jonah, but before we get into a conversation with Kirk, I'd like to talk a little bit about what I've learned and why we're doing this podcast. Substance abuse affects almost all of us. There is hardly a family to be found that is not affected in some way by addiction, whether that's drugs or alcohol or gambling or some other type of addictive behavior. What I've learned is there is a huge lack of understanding about the topic of addiction. So many times I've heard people say, whether it's the addicts themselves or their family members say, I just had no idea what to do. When you don't have the right information, a lot of critical mistakes can be made. When families are left uninformed, they're also unprepared to deal with it when it confronts their family. I've also heard people say, if I had only known this, or if I had only known that before reactively making a decision that ultimately turned out to do more harm than good. Our intent here is to create a greater awareness, and with that, a better understanding of the topic of addiction. More specifically, we're going to be focused on 3 goals. The first is to shed more light on this topic by sharing useful information and resources that help families make better decisions and find ways to cope. And 2, we want to try to remove the associated stigma that often holds people back from talking openly about this. And 3, by sharing relatable experiences, we hope to inspire people to take steps to turn their life around. If you are struggling with addiction, it's important to know you are not alone. You might feel alone. But by hearing other people talk about their stories, their experiences, stories you might relate to, stories that hit you to the core, and stories that just maybe you see yourself in, then maybe you'll feel comfortable reaching out to someone, connecting with others, and take steps towards recovery. In 2020, I wrote a book called Voices from the Fallen, True Stories of Addiction, Grief, Recovery, and Courage. The book contains 8 stories from a diverse group of people, all with different causes, effects, and outcomes. And each is told from the first-person point of view. And they talk about their emotions, their trauma, and grief. But more importantly, they share a message of hope, encouragement, and inspiration. While interviewing people for the book, I was overwhelmed with how many people wanted to share their stories, all with the intent to help other people. So many times I've heard them say, if my experience, if my pain, if my suffering can help someone else, then I'm willing to share my story if it prevents someone else from going down the same destructive path and ruining their lives. I've sat down with a lot of people, and I can tell you it takes a lot of courage to do that. In fact, I was so inspired by that courage, we started a website called healingvoicesproject.com that serves as a platform where people can share their stories and learn from others. And here we are, bringing you this podcast with even more courageous voices sharing a message of hope and healing. Each episode will be dedicated to someone we lost through addiction. And we're going to ask our listeners if they'd like to donate to a charity or organization that was special to that person. Today, we're dedicating this episode to Jack Jonah, a 19-year-old who we lost to a heroin addiction in April of 2016. The Jack Jonah Foundation was formed in 2019 as a 501c3 whose mission is to provide support, education, and opportunities in the area of drug awareness. Visit thejackjonahfoundation.org to learn more and contribute to its mission. Thank you very much. Now today, as I mentioned, we have Kirk Jonah as my guest. Kirk is the founder of the Jack Jonah Foundation and, of course, Jack's father. Kirk, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is the launching of the podcast. This is episode number 1.
Yeah.
So,
well, good luck with it.
Yeah, thanks.
It's needed. It's really needed.
Thank you. Yeah. So, what have you been up to lately?
So let me just tell you a little bit about Jack, if I may. Jack passed away on April 6th, 2016, from a heroin overdose. So it's 5 years and 6 months that he's passed, and it was a complete surprise to our family. We did not know Jack was doing heroin, and Jack was a good kid. He was attending college. He was a biology major. He was an art minor, and he worked at Boston Road Animal Hospital. He assisted the vets in surgery with the animals. Mm-hmm. We've had many conversations about what his future path was going to be. And we kind of narrowed it down to two things. Jack was going to either be a surgical vet, because he loved animals, or nursing medical profession. So Jack was fiercely loyal to his friends and his family. He was a very, very talented young man. He was very much involved in writing of a play called Labels with other individuals. And it was a play about bullying. Mm-hmm. And that play was a comedy, but it really talked about the seriousness of bullying.
Yeah. Getting the message through comedy is pretty effective.
Yes, and it was really just an amazing play. So he was involved with others in writing that. He also played the organ in church. He played the piano. He played the guitar, and his passion really was art.
Talented guy.
Very talented, and he had it all going for him, Mike. And but he had a secret, and he hit it well. Jack was doing heroin.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a clue? Did you have any signs?
We did not. 5 months prior to his passing, he stayed upstairs with my son, who was home from college, Dan, and my other daughter, his younger sister. The three of them stayed in a room for about 5 weeks every night, where it's like in an apartment. And they played a guitar, they sang, they did watch movies, and they didn't see it. He spent the Sunday before he passed on Wednesday, he spent the entire morning with my terminally ill brother together, and he didn't see it. We have a friend that is a recovering heroin addict of about 7 years, and he met with Jack, and he didn't see it. So we didn't see it.
You know, anytime this happens, it's tragic, of course. But I think without seeing any signs, you didn't have the ability to intervene. You didn't have an ability to stop and say, okay, hey, what's going on here? Because it never occurred to you.
Yeah, so for us, ours was just, it was a shock.
Yeah.
I mean, I left for a doctor's appointment in the morning. I received a phone call from a friend of mine who's on the police force. Come to the house, I figured my alarm system went off. I got there, and there he was. Yeah. And again, it was a complete surprise. Now, I look back, right? I think back, because since then, as we'll talk further with about the foundation and
Right.
what we've done, I've learned a lot about it.
Yeah.
And you don't just go right away put a needle in your arm. It's a process,
Right.
right? It's a series of steps that get you there.
Right.
And we'll talk about that later.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously, I didn't want to believe that at first. That I thought, maybe he just experimented and he accidentally overdosed, but he actually went through the steps to get where you're putting a needle in your arm.
And you're right. Now, in looking back, you could see it, or after talking to people, you can see, okay, that was the process. But at
Right.
the time, it just pulled a rug.
I didn't want to believe it. Right. As time was progressing.
And I think, not to interrupt you, but I think that's the case with a lot of parents. I don't know if it's denial because you didn't have the time to go through that, but a lot of people won't recognize that because maybe they just don't want to.
It could be. And Mike, I think back. What did I miss?
Yeah.
Because I'm the father. This happened under my watch. Right. This is a failure as a father. And so you sit back and you look back, what did I miss? Now, was he becoming more isolated? Maybe. I don't know. And Jack was going to school on time. He was going to work on time.
Yeah.
His grades weren't suffering. All those things were still in play.
Yeah, and if you see, and we'll talk about the signs, the obvious signs, and none of those were evident.
That I could see.
Right.
And so, in talking with my daughter, who was really new, was with Jack most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
She kind of would sit back. Maybe he was getting a little more isolated. Maybe he was doing some things without me.
Right.
But that's kind of where we're at with it.
And that's not unusual, even for somebody of that age without taking drugs, because you have the mood swings and you have the
Sure.
typical teen behavior and
Sure,
the withdrawal and so
Yeah.
on, and the awkwardness going through all that. So I think some of it you might just say, well, that's normal, right? And you start to think it's normal. And it may be because people do get into that and they get out of it. I know, like with many people, adolescence, you're working through peer pressure, bullying, things like that you might not be aware of what's happening to your child.
Sure. Yeah.
That's because it's not in your home.
Mm-hmm.
Those things don't happen in your home. The home becomes the safe haven, and outside of that, there may be some things occurring that you're just not aware of. And that's what's hard because you don't always have those antennas up and you can't sense everything.
Yeah. And so I can get into a story right now of two brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And the brother found out his brother was doing heroin, and he called his parents, and he said, "Mom, Dad, my brother's doing heroin." And their first response was, "Not our son, not in our home." It's a true story.
Yeah.
Someone I know
Yeah.
very, very well.
Yeah.
And so the brother kept being persistent, saying, "We got to do something." And they went to Learn to Cope. And it's an organization that supports people that are going through these types of things.
Yeah.
And they learn what the signs were, what to look for. They got Narcan.
Yeah.
And sure enough, one night they came home, and the bathroom door was locked. And they had to kick it down. And they applied Narcan 3 to 4 times, and it revived him.
Mm.
And that's because he had some sort of a listed additive to the heroin, so it took multiple
Okay.
times.
Yeah.
So when I'm out speaking to,
By the way, do you know what that additive was?
yes, it was fentanyl.
Okay, fentanyl. I
So,
thought so. I just
yeah.
wanted to make sure.
So,
Yeah.
So when I'm out speaking,
Mhm.
and we do, the foundation does quite a bit of speaking, and it started out mostly with young adults, but it's really grown to older individuals, and homes and recovery centers. But what I'll say to the kids is, how did you think the brother felt that his other brother was so-called squealing on him?
Hmm.
And they go, "Oh, not good." And that's right.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
I go, "How do you think they are today,
Mhm.
10 years later?" They're best friends.
Mm-hmm.
Because the brother who's doing the heroin was not capable of making a good decision. The other brother was capable of making it for him, and he saved his brother's life. And so I'll tell you another story. Guy and a girl. Girl knew this guy was doing heroin, didn't say anything. He died. I'll say to the kids, how do you think that girl is doing today? Because she didn't speak up. They go, not good. No, that's correct. She's not doing well at all.
Right.
So which one are you going to be? Which one are you going to be?
Yeah. And that's really, really important. It's easy to say. It is much harder to do, because
Sure.
let's say if I knew a friend or a family member and I suspected that, I'd say, I have something's not right. Is he taking pills? Something's not right. It's easy to say, well, let's just see. Maybe his dad, somebody else will see it, and I don't want to interfere. I don't want to offend anybody. And out of the fear of offending people, you don't say anything. People remain silent. And then after the fact, maybe it's at a funeral, maybe it's when someone's in the hospital, and say, yeah, I wondered about that. Now I feel terrible for not saying anything. And that stays with you forever. That's permanent.
Yeah, that's correct.
Whereas the discomfort, the possibility of offending somebody is temporary. Now, again, that's easy for us to say here, but it's very difficult in practice to say, yeah, I think I'm going to say something. And then how do you say it? Hey, I think you're behaving a little weird. Are you taking drugs? What's going on here? You take somebody by surprise, and they say, well, F you. Well, F you. Well, all of a sudden, there's a strained relationship. So you have to be tactful.
Yeah, so what I say to the kids is go to someone you trust, an adult that you trust, and let them know.
Yeah.
And I have a story of a young girl came to me after I spoke. Said, Mr. Jonah, my friend is doing heroin, and I'm afraid to tell his father because I don't want to hurt his feelings. And I said, well, wouldn't you rather have his feelings hurt for a short period of time than like Mr. Jonah for the rest of his life? And she went, oh. And off she went with guidance.
Yeah.
And hopefully she had the courage to speak up and save her friend's life. So I get those types of questions when I speak. I had another one. A young lady said, my mom was doing heroin. I was living alone with my mom, and I didn't want to be removed from the house. I was afraid I'd be taken if I spoke up. And since her mother passed. And I said, well, are you getting any sort of professional support? She said, no. I said, well, Mr. Jonah's 59 and he gets it. Don't you think maybe it might be something good for you? She said, and off she went with guidance.
And, it happens with a lot of adults where you say, I got this handled. Maybe it's the ego. I don't need help. I can handle this myself. And you said something earlier about somebody not being able to make a decision. The problem is they're not aware that they can't make that decision. They're not as conscious of it, and they don't know how their brain is altered. So they get stubborn. They get obstinate and say, no, I can do this. And even if you're just normal human behavior, right, to say, I can handle this. Fact is, this is such a different realm of reality here that a lot of people can't handle it. They just don't know it. If you're getting counseling, if you're just getting guidance, like I said earlier, so many people say, I just had no idea what to do. I don't know where to go, who to talk to, where do I start? It's amazing. And then not knowing that information, they're doing things that backfire, that have a worse effect, and do more harm because maybe they applied some pressure where they shouldn't have been, maybe more understanding, or did something that drove somebody away rather than bring them closer.
Yeah, I recently did a talk to a group home of recovering individuals, men. It's a Michael Diaz Foundation, and they have 2 homes. And it's probably about 30 men. And in speaking with them, they really wanted to know what it was like to be a father who lost his child to heroin. And notice that's where they were always, all their questions were going. And because it dawned on me that they put their loved ones through a lot, and they are now in recovery. And they did not do that to their parents because they're in recovery, right?
Yeah.
And their stories were fairly kind of the same path. You know, they started with one gentleman started with a prescription opioid painkiller. He had his thumb operated on.
Yeah.
And he went down that journey to where he started putting a needle in his arm. Another gentleman was just at a party, and they had him in a basket, and there were Percocets, and he had one while he was, you know, having drinks, and he became an addict, where the other ones in the party didn't. His friends that he was with, and he's 62 years old. He said he started doing heroin at the age of 57, 58.
Yeah.
And you got all those stories in your book, you know it. And I just found that it was a very, very interesting conversation between myself, and that's the first time I've done a recovery home. And it was just really, it was really something. And again, it educated as well. But a lot of them, just the last thing I want to say on that is, they were kind of at the bottom when they turned it around, or at rock bottom. When for something, a lot of them was because of religion. They found, they prayed, or something happened that enabled them to find something.
Right.
And here they are, we're in a recovery center.
Yeah.
And it was very educational.
A lot of people so many people have gone through the process of rehab in and out, and out, and they feel like they've failed each time, and maybe it's a temporary failure because they go in rehab and maybe get worse because they hit the rock bottom. But several of the people that are in the book, same thing. They found there's Christian programs that even some of the people say, no, that's not for me. But
they're all different journeys.
All different, but you know, some people say, well, then again, everything else has failed, and everything else I've tried hasn't worked. Maybe I ought to be open to this because I'm exhausted. I'm emotionally spent, and I don't know where else to turn. And that is successful quite a bit with certain people. And yeah, there's a few people in the book that have reached that rock bottom, that get there. And you know, a lot of people say, hey, let the person reach rock bottom. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I think the earlier you can stop and nip it, why allow it to go to rock bottom if you don't have to? Because then you just have that much more financial devastation. You have more broken families, and you risk tragedies.
Yeah, and now they're calling it one and done. The illicit drug, the fentanyl, is not only just in heroin now, it's in everything.
Yeah.
So I have an individual that I worked with, nephew, and a friend did cocaine, and the cocaine had it. And one individual died, and the other one is severely brain damage. So it's in everything. And so people that I've talked to, they say it's one and done now. Yeah. I mean, the kids today, the young adults say, and anybody, they don't have the luxury of making a mistake because it's now going to be more fatal.
Little forgiveness.
Right.
When you have that.
You don't have the luxury to make a mistake.
No.
So, so now it's in everything.
Well, you talked earlier about the party and the little bucket of pills. Like, you know, pick a pill out of the pile. You don't know what's in there because it's not prescribed. It's just pills. How dangerous is that?
I have two friends.
Yeah.
They grabbed the prescription bottle from the medicine cabinet that was being used in the home, and they're saying, "Hey, it's from a drugstore. It's good. It's my dad had back surgery. He's a little goofy." But hey, it's not the stuff on the street. It's actually in the container.
Well, that may be true. Do you really trust that person just because they said so?
Right, but the thing is they're taking something out of a prescription bottle
for someone else, right?
Right, for someone else, and you don't know which one you're going to be if you're going to get addicted or not.
Right.
In the majority of the overdose deaths. So in 2020, we had 93,331. It's a 30% increase from the previous year. 75% of those had some form of additive to the drug that they overdosed on and died. And so when and then as I've spoken to those who are in recovery, the majority of them have said to me, Mr. Jonah, I started by taking a prescription opioid painkiller. It was Vicodin, Percocet, Oxycontin, which is oxycodone,
Right.
Morphine. That's how it started.
Right.
And the majority of the ones that I have personally spoken to,
Mm-hmm.
that's how it started for them.
Yeah. You know, you and I go back a long, long time.
3 to 4 years old.
I know.
Yeah.
I don't want to count those years, but that's
Yeah.
a long, long time.
Yeah, it is.
And through all those years, I know you've had multiple back surgeries.
I have, yeah.
I've had multiple knee surgeries.
Yeah.
And I know each time, each of us was prescribed the pain
That's
medication.
correct. Yeah.
And, you know, each time you're sent home with a bottle of, used to be Percocets, and now it's more of the Oxy, and a full bottle. Now, for me, I've had 12 times those surgeries, 12 times where here's your bottle, and you start taking these things.
Mm-hmm.
Knock on wood, I haven't had that experience of becoming addicted. However, I have a small experience with that, so I can't relate to the severity of some people, but back in May of 1999, I had my PCL, posterior cruciate ligament, replaced in my right knee. I was living alone at the time, and got sent home on the crutches and the pills. And I had a job where I could work from home, living alone. I had no reason to get out of the house. And I remember getting very depressed after taking those pills for less than a week.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I started sleeping during the day and was awake all night. And I needed more pills to change that, for the pain and just to get normal. Well, it wasn't making me normal. That was in May. So it went into June, even July, and things were fuzzy and hazy, but I just kept going with this, getting a refill. And living alone, there's a combination of things. You get depressed, you're living alone, there's nobody to help you, there's nobody to say, hey, didn't you have that pill another 4 hours ago? You shouldn't have it. No, I just did it on my own. Well, that entire summer, right now, was a fog to me, and it took maybe till October, November for me to say, what the hell am I doing? What happened to the last 3 months? I don't remember anything, because I was awake all night and sleep all day, so I don't remember anything. I just remember it being dark all the time. and somehow I had to snap out of it, and I did, but I can see how that happens, especially if you're alone, especially if you have other factors that might cause depression, and then you take the pills to relieve that, and it starts the cycle.
Yeah, and the more and more isolated you get,
The worse it is.
the worse it gets.
That's why we
Yes.
constantly talk about reaching out, connecting with others, sharing your stories, keeping the interaction with people.
Mhm.
I mean, connection with others is the opposite of isolation. So it's easy to say again, getting out of isolation is the first thing, and having some network to work with.
Yeah, so I have a gentleman, young man that I spoke with. He was a college football player, quarterback,
Mm-hmm.
and had shoulder surgery and started taking the pain
Yeah.
medicine.
Yeah.
And he started out taking the pain medicine, then he started snorting it. And then from there, he started snorting heroin. And he was doing 10, 15 packs a day.
Mm.
And then from there, he graduated to where, progressed to where him and his friend each shot each other up.
Yeah.
And then from there, he went on his own.
Mm-hmm.
And he became into such isolation. He was in and out of rehab many, many, many times. And he went into a local convenience store and put a needle in his arm
Yeah.
so he'd be found.
So
And
he'd be
from
found.
there, he
Yeah.
was found and then taken to where he got help.
Yeah.
And with the professional help that he's received, he's clean.
Yeah.
He's in recovery. So, that's just again, I keep going back to those pain. And so one of the things that the foundation does, so the foundation, if I may, just a
No,
little
I'm glad,
bit.
because I was going to
Okay.
ask.
So the
and- yeah.
foundation's goals are to honor those, who we've lost and their loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
Educate our young adults in our communities regarding the opioid crisis that we're all facing, and support those who are fighting the fight every day. So honor,
Mm-hmm.
educate, support.
Perfect. Could you give me a few examples of how the Jack Jonah Foundation has, helped the community or
Sure.
other organizations?
Sure. So I spoke to 2,100 kids
Mm-hmm.
in 2 days.
Okay.
Um,
Local here?
Yep, I did West Springfield. I've done multiple
Yep.
towns and communities, and it's kind of been, obviously, COVID kind of stopped it. But I've done numerous towns and communities around this area.
Yeah.
I've done other New Hampshire, Connecticut. So one thing is getting in front of the kids and sharing not just a Jack Jonah story, but true stories of others.
Yeah.
Like I've said, a few of them today.
Yeah.
And I show parts of the movie. I do a couple clips. I talk about really having, have the strength to make the right decision. And so that at the very end of it, I put up something up on the screen. And I say to them, what is that? And they go, birth certificate. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Death certificate. And it zoomed in. So this is what you get as a parent 6 weeks after you bury your child.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to read the cause of death. It's acute heroin intoxication. I read it again. I make them say it out loud. I said, you may not remember me when you leave here. You may not remember Jack Jonah. You may not remember all the stories I share with you. But take a look at that death certificate. And when you're out in the world and you're going to be faced with challenging decisions, we all are. Hopefully that will give you the strength to make the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is numerous kids will come up to me, and I have guidance around me. And then as I talk to them, they go off with guidance. So we do a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
We have a walk that we do called Jack's Walk, and during that walk, we'll honor those that have passed, and we'll have photographs of individuals that have passed. So we honor them, and we have their year, their name, the year born, and the year passed. And families will come, and groups will come, and in large groups to honor their loved one. We also have information along the walk,
Mm-hmm.
so that as children are walking, they'll read it, and that will hopefully create conversation. Because it's a walk. It's a 3.5 mile walk. And then the last thing we have is those that are in recovery, there's hope. There's a path. There's
Mm-hmm.
a way. And so that's been powerful because for my family, there's nothing like for that.
Well, first, when is that walk scheduled for?
May 14th,
Okay.
2022.
Last year he had to cancel,
Because
obviously.
yeah, COVID. And you can find the information at jackjonahfoundation.org.
Right.
So we'll do the walk. We had the movie that you were the one that was really instrumental in getting the movie called Jack Jonah. It's on Amazon Prime
Yeah.
and other streaming venues. And it's not a biography, but it's a story about a journey, a father and his son and others, and a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of true stories. And in the movie, you'll be watching it, and then all of a sudden you're going to get hit with something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to get you.
Yeah.
And at the very end, you're going to get this boom.
Yeah.
So a lot of folks that have watched the movie have called me and asked me to come in and speak.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the schools are showing it in their health classes. I've had many recovery centers watch it
Mm-hmm.
and ask me to come in.
Yeah.
So that's happened quite a bit. We also donate to. We donated some time ago to Providence Healthcare Systems
That's right. I remember that. Yeah.
for Addiction Center.
Yep.
And we support that. So we do a lot of different things.
Good. Good. You were talking earlier about the walk, and with the signs, the posters of people who we've lost, and I made me think about it when somebody who's 19-year-old like Jack. There's a lot of people that age, and I even in the book, the consistent feeling was, even from their family members, that they felt invincible. they felt this couldn't happen to me. There's this feeling of invincibility, especially with the younger people who
Sure.
they haven't experienced death and they don't think about it like maybe we do at our older age. But that is a common theme that, oh, I'll take the pill from the basket, I'll survive it. And when you have this sense, a real sense of mortality versus that sense of invincibility, maybe that's a shift that people need to make, because they've survived everything so far. They haven't experienced it, and it's a tough thing to get past.
Yeah, and like I've said several times, it's one and done now.
Right.
One mistake.
In Jack's case, now, when you were surprised by all of this, obviously, and he had just begun taking it. I mean, you didn't have time to see the patterns, because if it was one and done, or if he had maybe done it one time before, but you didn't have enough time to actually see.
Right. We did not see that
Yeah.
that pattern of not going to school, not going to work,
Yeah.
Stealing.
Right.
We didn't see any of that.
Yeah.
So it clearly was, and then other things that I was able to do. It showed us that it was a very early on experience.
Yeah.
So we didn't have that many years of the difficulty that a lot of the stories are in your book. A lot of the stories of those that I've met with it was years and years and years. And now with fentanyl coming into the scene,
Right.
now the overdose rates are increasing. And so just that 93,331 overdose deaths in 2020. Think about it. That's all of West Springfield.
Yeah.
That's all of Agawam, and almost all of Westfield gone in 1 year.
Right.
And when I get with the kids, that's what I do. When I'm talking to the young adults, I'll put up on the screen, how many people do you think live, let's just say we'll take the local area. I say, how many people do you think live in West Springfield? And they go back and forth. And depending on the age, and I say it's 28,000, I forget what exactly it is, 28,700.
Yeah.
Agawam, 28,000 something. And I put it up on the screen. Westfield, their number. And then I'll say, how many people do you think overdose? And they'll go back and forth, and then I'll put up on the screen 42,700, 47,600. And I keep putting it up. And then I have a total. And I go, just think about it. That's all of your town. Next town, gone.
Yeah.
And it hits them because their towns are border when they're young. That's their border.
It's their community. It's what
Right.
Yeah,
And
they relate
they're
to.
like,
Yeah.
wow, that's a big number.
Right.
So those are the types of things that we try to do.
Yeah, and those statistics are pretty overwhelming, especially when you see a 30% increases. Unfortunately, it's not a surprise. During 2020 with the COVID, we talked about isolation. Isolation happened.
Not being able to go to your meetings.
Right. Everybody's quarantining, and then you say, well, and people couldn't go to meetings.
That's correct.
Which is very difficult too. And of those 93,000, they're not just young people. Obviously, there's quite an age. It's such a diverse group of people that it affects virtually everybody. And you've got from any age, race, gender, economic status.
Does not discriminate.
It does not. And so you find people who, like, wow. So going back to that stigma I mentioned earlier, is it's no longer, the person behind the dumpster shooting. It's people in their big homes and their bathrooms, and
It's happened in our family.
yeah. So you can't ever rule out someone saying, well, no, that can't be right. It can be right because it's our friends, our family, our coworkers, our neighbors. It's everybody. It affects everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I have a gentleman that's in recovery, and he was a coach.
Yeah. The other thing too is it's the statistics you talk about are tragic, and you think about that many people. But when some people see statistics, they seem distant. It's like, say, well, geez, 10,000 people died in an earthquake in Central America. You go, wow, that's pretty awful. And it goes away because it's a large number, it's distant. But the tragedy of your neighbor's daughter dying hits them. It's the personal tragedies that have the impact, right? When people say, yeah, I heard 93,000, but what really matters to me is my son, my daughter, my niece, my nephew. I had a niece. Actually, it was my nephew's, no, my cousin's daughter. About 5 years ago, she was involved with drugs and had a shaky relationship, and apparently wasn't thinking straight. And in South Hadley, she we didn't know it at the time, but she jumped in the river in January. They found her body in April. Very tragic, and it was related to the drugs. And that family tragedy that just devastates people all around it.
Mm-hmm.
And those things, that kind of devastation, that kind of broken family, the people who live with it, there aren't statistics to measure that.
That's correct.
And it's very difficult to say, well, that is happening here, and these are the numbers, and they're going up. But what you don't see is the divorces that come from it, the financial devastation, the behaviors that change in broken families. That is something that you can't measure in a statistic. The other thing that a good friend of ours, told me about his son that was going through addiction for years, in rehab, out of rehab, stealing, going, missing in action. It was just years and years of this, and finally he said, I didn't know what to do anymore. I've tried everything. I was exhausted to a point where I thought, maybe, just maybe, after all, he's better off dead. And maybe we're all better off if he's dead. Now that's an inconceivable statement from a parent. But unless you've experienced that, you have no idea what drives you to that until you're there. And again, that's something that you can't find described in a book. It's devastating.
Mm-hmm.
These are the types of things we want to try to prevent. Obviously, that's what we're both doing here. But that's the type of thing that it's hard to convey.
So when I speak with a group of adults,
Mm-hmm.
I'll say to them, and I'll explain to them that the majority of the individuals that I've had that have shared their stories with me,
Yeah.
they all will tell me they started with a Vicodin, Oxycontin, Oxycodone
Yeah.
type of drug.
Yeah.
And so I'll say to the audience, I said, you have to raise your hand, but how many of you here right now listening to me talk have something like that back
Mm-hmm.
home
Mm-hmm.
in your cabinet?
Yeah.
And you see the faces.
Mm.
And I said, what you can do right now when you leave here is go home and lock them up. Lock them up. And then dispose of them properly.
Mm.
And in West Springfield and other towns, the police department has a medical drop box that you can get rid of anything you want. And I said, so each and every one of you, the 150 of you that are here listening to me right now,
Mm-hmm.
if you go home and do that, think of how many lives you will all save. So that's really what I'm trying to get out there is get these things, lock them up, get rid of them, because the more we can get rid of that stuff, hopefully we can save a life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Jack would want.
Right.
And that's the message I give whenever I'm on TV or speaking, is take these and have a controlled environment. I'll give you, I know we're probably running out of time, but I had an individual that went on a walk
Mm-hmm.
with another individual. They didn't know each other. And the one on the walk, as they're walking 3+ miles, they talk. And things start, as you walk, you see these things and you start talking. She said, I lost my son. And she goes, his picture's not here, but I just decided to come
Mm-hmm.
to be with others that are in my situation. And as I walked, she said, my son had a dental procedure and started taking it was a Percocet, I think, one of them. And he went through them, and he said, I still have pain, I want more. So unbeknownst to me, he got some from another family member, and he overdosed, eventually on heroin, and died.
Yeah.
So the woman walking with her calls me and says, my son's getting his wisdom teeth removed, and he's being prescribed a painkiller.
Mm-hmm.
What should I do? I go, it's your decision. Your decision what you do. But control it. Manage it.
Mm.
So they decided to give him one right after the surgery.
Okay.
Took the bottle, brought it down to the police station, got rid of it. So there's a life that's saved.
Yeah, because you don't know, as we said.
Don't know.
Certain people are more prone to it, and others.
You don't know who you are. You don't know who you're going to be. It could be one person in a large family. It could be you just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the things that we're trying to get out there.
Right.
When you're showing your house for sale, what do you do with all your things in your medicine cabinet? Do you lock them up? There you go.
Mm.
So, anyways.
Well, I can see that, some of the people I've spoken with the book, and you reminded me of one of them, Jeff, in the book. 53 years old, started using heroin, but that was due to his back injury
Mm-hmm.
and then pain medication. And
Mm-hmm.
when I spoke with him, he said never in a million years. He had 4 daughters, a bunch of grandkids. Never in a million years would he ever have thought that he'd be going through an addiction to heroin.
Right.
And this is just typical, because they said, no, I'm not. In fact, here's an interesting aspect. He said he went to the doctor for a follow-up, and he had taken a few of the pills. He said, I took a couple, I didn't need them, I was okay, and went back to the doctor, and the doctor said, you probably need more pills now, right? And he goes, no, I got plenty left. I got plenty left. I'm fine. Doctor, well, you shouldn't have plenty left, because you obviously aren't taking them as I prescribed. If you had taken them as prescribed, you need to stay ahead of the pain. Take them as prescribed.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
And I'll give you another prescription, because you don't want that pain to get to you. And he goes, well, I'm okay, but all right, well, you know best.
Sure.
He followed that advice, and that led to his addiction.
Sure. So these are the things we need to share.
Right.
Right? So that people manage it, control it.
Right.
You don't leave a loaded pistol on your countertop
It's the equivalent
and go
Yeah.
away for a weekend.
Right.
Right? You lock it up.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with these. You need to lock it up.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. Well, we could talk here all day. I know we could, because there's so much. There's so many. We'd love to have you back. But if you had to wrap up and say, okay, if one point, if you had talked to some parents or some, anyone, as we said, it doesn't have to be parents or teenagers. It could be anybody. If there's any parting words of advice, what would you say?
Okay, so I never will give advice to anybody
Mm-hmm.
about something like this, but I will tell you what we did, what our family did,
Yeah.
and also what people have said to me. So, for instance, people, those that I've spoken to who are in recovery, they always told me they carried their drug paraphernalia in their backpack. It wasn't in the house drawer. It's always with them wherever they go.
Okay.
The thing about it, the backpack is always on them
Right.
wherever they go.
Yep.
That's where they carry it. And so I've stated this many times over the 5 years and 6 months, and parents have reached out to me and said, Kirk, I went into the backpack, found something.
Well, actually, I think that is good advice.
So
it's
that's
great
just,
advice.
but that's advice that was given to me by those who are in recovery.
Yeah.
And so I share that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's that. The other parting piece again is control what you have in your home for medicine, and really think about if you're gonna take something, manage it. And lastly, as a family, what we did is we met a therapist as a family,
Mm-hmm.
and then we branched off to we all have our own.
Yeah.
And it's helped my family tremendously to do that. It's a very difficult thing.
Right.
It's difficult every day, and you go minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, and the next thing you know, 5 years and 6 months have passed.
Right. There's nothing more difficult than that.
Yep.
Than losing a child. we want to share information through this podcast, through our websites, through the Healing Voices Project website, and of course through the Jack Jonah Foundation, which is jackjonahfoundation.org, right? And you've got lots of information on your website.
I do.
Yeah.
There is an area there where you can go
Yeah.
and find out if you need support, and it lists out all the different support agencies that are in our area.
Different resources.
And you can click on the link. It takes you right to their website.
Perfect.
You can call. These organizations will call you. They get back to you right away. So that's on the website. There's also other information on the website for different facilities. So there's a lot of information there that you can go to get what you need. So when people call me or email me or text me, Kirk, where can I go? I go to the website, click on those links, and you'll see Learn to Cope is one that a lot of people I know go to.
Yeah.
A lot of folks go to that. There's other ones on there too, because everyone's journey of healing is different.
Right.
Everyone goes a different path, but that's I always recommend people go there, and there's all sorts of information for you that can help you and guide you, because you got to move on it now. You cannot wait. And that's the other thing I close with is I tell one story about when I speak I hand out papers and I ask the kids to write down their questions, because they're not going to raise their hand and ask a question in front of their peers. So they write on a piece of paper. So you don't, and then I have people just pick it up, so you don't know whose question it is. And I always get, Mr. Jonah, when should I speak up if somebody I know is doing drugs? And I go, now.
Yeah.
Right
There's
now.
Never a better time
Now.
than now. Yeah.
And so those who are listening, again, go on their website. Again, I refer to Learn to Cope just because I know it better than the others, and act on it now. Because those two parents that I talked about, they did, and they saved their son's life, and he's alive today.
Yeah. Yep. Well, thank you for sharing all that.
You're welcome.
Thanks for
You're welcome,
joining
Mike.
us.
Yeah.
And for everyone listening, please visit the jackjonahfoundation.org and also our website, healingvoicesproject.com. You know, before we sign off, I do want to mention a couple things, too. I want to say thank you to a couple of people who have made this possible. I'd be very remiss if I didn't mention this. But first of all, Les Tingley, for all the behind-the-camera, behind-the-scenes technical work. Thank you, Les. It wouldn't be happening without you. And also to Jason Campbell. Jason is the president of JC Films, and Jason created the website, healingvoicesproject.com. And he also produced the video we did with Dean Kane. So your support is very much appreciated. So we'll wrap this one up. We will have another episode coming at you in a few weeks. Thank you again for joining us, and talk soon.
All right, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks.